Hi, this video is going to walk through how to use the Be Good People curriculum if you're an interventionist. So we're on the main Be Good People webpage, and you see there's the core edition in green, which is designed for school-wide, universal, everybody gets it, tier 1 instruction, which if you're in elementary typically is going to fall during like a morning meeting. If you're at secondary, an advisory is very typical. And you have less instructional time than if you're an interventionist. So, interventions are supplemental or intensive. They're that extra dose on top of core for students who need it. And our intervention edition is longer, more thorough. These used to be the same thing. We didn't used to have a core edition and an intervention edition. And teacher feedback over 2 years led to, hey, we need slimmer and more efficient and shorter materials to fit into our instructional time at core. So these things split, and they've just become more and more different over time. The intervention edition is just, we don't have any limits. I mean, the instructional time, especially for special education compared to core on this stuff, is immense. So there's just more we can have more dialogue about every element of the process. So I'll get into that. But one thing I wanted to highlight here is that on the left we have lessons, which are the most rigorous and structured element of the curriculum. So we're talking about a specific identified skill. We're talking about step by step, how it looks, how it sounds to use that skill, like staying on task, resolving conflicts, being assertive. Extension activities in the middle here are more flexible, and depending on your grade level you're teaching, for younger kids, there's going to be like read aloud, storybooks, YouTube videos with some discussion questions. There'll be songs with some discussion questions, worksheets, and then community building is just get to know you. So would you rather, icebreaker questions. We're not content focused like we are with lessons and extension activities. We're not aiming at specific SEL benchmarks. We're just getting to know each other better. So one of the things I just don't want to forget to mention, one of the most, not the most frequent, but a fairly frequent question I've gotten over the past 2 years with these curriculums being separated and with core and intervention edition is, could a school use both of these things at the same time? Could a school have Be Good People be their core and then also have their interventionists and their special education teachers using the intervention edition? And I go to the users. When I talk to interventionists and special education teachers and bump paths with them, I'll be asking, are you concerned? Are you running into any turbulence with your students you have in intervention groups using similar instructional materials to what people are using at core? And overwhelmingly, the response I get is no, for a number of reasons, especially in the younger grade levels. They say just not a big deal, period. If students get some repetition, it's just good for them. It helps with their learning. But even for the older kids, what I hear from middle school and high school interventionists and special education teachers often is, in an advisory, they have to, it's so slimmed down, they have to go through it so fast. And I just get to take my time and add a lot to it, add different materials, reteach it different ways. So no, I'm not concerned that there's some repetition. Now that said, one thing that's so important to emphasize is that we're doing different things with the green and the orange. So the green is, again, it's core. It's all the grade level benchmarks is what we're trying to hit, and everybody's getting the same thing, and it's the essential recipe of the school, where orange is there, that intervention edition for students who need supplemental and intensive instruction to target areas where they're struggling, where they're at risk. So with green, I'm moving fast and I'm trying to cover everything. Self-awareness, self-management, social awareness, relationship skills, responsible decision-making, all the SEL standards, all the benchmarks. For orange, I'm not trying to do that. I'm trying to be specific and targeted and intentional. And like if I were a math or a reading interventionist, I'm trying to close gaps. So I'm not going to teach 1 week or 2 like they would in advisory about calming strategies and then boom, we're done. I have students, especially if they're secondary, who have been struggling with that skill area for years, and they need to be retaught it in many different ways for a much longer period of time, and they need a lot of activities to bring out reflection and rationale of why that skill set is important and how to use it very specifically in different situations. So I just need so much more materials than you ever would at core. So even though the orange pieces that we're going to look at, that intervention edition, is more robust and lengthy and in-depth than the green core materials, even though that's the case, it's not enough. I was a social skill, specialized instruction teacher running groups for years, and I had the intervention edition, and I use so much more than that, and you should too. So, I just wanted to go up here under educators. We have explicit SEL instruction. And we kind of talk about, locally our schools use Be Good People or Second Step or some combination at core, and then at supplemental, Be Good People's intervention edition is still very common. It's probably the most common to use. But then there's other free, great go-to curriculums we have here. Harmony for elementary is fantastic. Overcoming Obstacles, Choose Love. I'm reading what's on the screen, but there's great options that are free. And then if you need more, we have a spreadsheet, filled with options. And then what I did with these, what I'd recommend you do with these is we click that planning scope and sequence button. We have templates here, which are basically, let's look at a completed example. Templates here where you can take from multiple different curriculums and blend together by topic or by sequence, and I'll get into that in a second. But you get it. You take from multiple sources and pull it together and weave it together so you have lots of material, because again, that's what you need, is lots of material, because I'm not trying to cover everything. I'm trying to hone in on what the students in front of me really need to focus on. What's the holdup for them? So is it their relationship skills or conflict resolution skills? You might say it's everything. Well, we got to start somewhere, and we got to start really focusing in on a certain skill set they need and build that up. So these are just, again, some different formatting options, but highly recommend that if you are an interventionist, this is your toolbox. You start taking from multiple places and pulling together a lot of resources, which you will just build and enhance over time so that you are equipped to teach and reteach and reteach and reteach the same topic area, skill area, as much as you need to be as in-depth as you need to be. So one last thing about this, there's two ways I think, I don't know if these are the right terms, these are ones that we came up with to kind of describe how interventions are structured. And one is like a cyclical intervention. So you may have worked, for example, in a school where they have a friendship group that runs for 6 weeks. And then, day 1, day 2, day 3, day 4, the activities, what we're doing on those days are defined. So there's a recipe that I'm playing out over those 6 weeks for students who need that dosage of friendship skills work. And then when it's done, we meet as a data team and decide, are those students ready to just only core, or do they need something else? But it's a defined, it's cyclical, and then it starts over again. And we start with a new group of students, a new cohort of students in that friendship group. Then there's Agile, and I think that tends to work better at Tier 2, because Tier 2 is like plug and play. It's about standardization, about a consistent recipe that is on call and rapidly available for kids, and we just match students to what they need. So having this menu of cyclical intervention groups running ideally is a great way to go. So at high school or middle school, for example, that might be a term. So like quarter 1, we have an academic success class. And when students are done with it, they might get a check and connect mentor, for example. So a lot of cyclical, shorter term things. Agile instruction for SEL, when you're an interventionist, is I think a better fit and is more resembling what we do at Tier 3 and then special education, because that can go on for an indefinite amount of time. With special education, I worked with students for years and years, and I'm not going to have a defined sequence where it's day 1, day 2, day 3, day 4, day 5. I'm going to be working with them for a while. So I need a lot of different, that's where this document is designed for that agile instruction. It's just organized by topic, and I can just dig into specific topics for as long as I need to and then shift. So I just have more agility, and it's just driven more by the needs of the students in front of me than this like defined recipe that I'm just playing out and then repeating. So, pros and cons, and I kind of talked about where they might fit in a system. But again, the point I'm trying to make here is that Be Good People Intervention Edition is not going to be enough for all the needs of your students. You just pull from other sources. There's a lot of other great material out there. And, if push came to shove, if for whatever reason, if your school was convinced and the movers and shakers in your school were convinced, we just can't. We have to use this at core or this for interventionists, but we can't double up. We can't use it for both. I mean, in that situation, I would say you got to use it at core, because going back to the history of Be Good People, we started making this at the beginning of the COVID pandemic to get tier 1 materials that would be accessible to all teachers for universal instruction as quickly as possible. So we were really laser focused on how can we make this as easy to use as possible. It's easy to grasp for people who have no training and no experience doing SEL instruction. Try and make it as easy to use. And then free. So if you look at the process for purchasing SEL curriculum materials for tier 1 and how much it costs and the subscriptions involved year to year versus 1 or 2 interventionists in the building needing materials bought for them, I mean, it's completely night and day. So like if I work with interventionists, and if we need to budget a couple $100 to get them access to some digital curriculum materials, it's not terribly difficult versus how difficult it would be to say we need a subscription built into our school budget every year for this curriculum package that's digital for tier 1 instruction. I mean, if you think about how many students it benefits to have that core tier 1 instruction, that's all I'm saying is that, Be Good People is really designed to, if it does one thing, make tier 1 universal instruction accessible to as many students as possible. That's what we're about. And to accomplish that, it's free. And then it is designed for maximum usability, ease of use for teachers who have never done this before. So with all of that said, let's dig into some actual Be Good People materials. So I'm clicking 4 through 5, and I'm going to scroll down and just click ignoring distractions. So this is going to open up a folder, and it's 4 through 5 ignoring distractions. So it's my lesson slides and then some materials. So I'm going to go through, maybe this is a mistake, but I'm going to go through the materials first before the lesson slides. And these are, make no mistake, the main show are these lesson slides. But let's look, first there's a lesson plan. So everything I say in this video is going to basically be said in this lesson plan, because it takes you through the order of the lesson and why things are there, why they're in the sequence they're in, and what they're about. So don't sleep on the lesson plan, because it's a useful tool. And this is a homework report, and I'll just let you take a look at it, but I won't go super in depth. But it's something, all of this is optional, completely optional. It's something that you could, in my experience, I would use one of these during, I would use one of these over the span of a couple of days is where I was going with that. So if I did that, if I was teaching 4th and 5th graders ignoring distractions, early in the week, I might give a homework report, have them take it home, and then bring it back on our last day of instruction. I might not do that every week. I might only do it sometimes, but it's some homework reflection questions. So it's just there if you need it. There is a observation worksheet. So when we look in the lesson and there's slides about modeling and practice in response to some scenarios, this is a worksheet that can be something tangible for students to be completing during that. And again, it's completely optional because you can do all of that just verbally with students. Then there's a poster. So in the school where I worked, we would print these, and in every classroom, it was a special education, behavior focused school exclusively, and in every classroom we had a skill of the week, so we'd post the poster for that skill of the week. So that's kind of what the origin of these. But they're just meant for like 8.5 by 11 normal paper. Put it in like a sheet protector on the wall. Rationale or why worksheets. So again, I'll talk about as we go through the lesson slides where these things would fit, but same thing as I said with the observation worksheet. This is just something tangible for students to write on if you want, but you can do everything in the lesson verbally if you want. And, I keep saying these are optional. In the lesson plan, keep pointing to the lesson plan, there it is, rationale worksheet. So it says kind of where it would fit and what it's for. So don't sleep on the lesson plans. Then school home notes. So again, completely optional. We didn't use these in the school, even though they existed, they were there for us. We didn't use them in the school where I worked on a regular basis. I tried to make it work, but we ran into logistical problems of getting them to home and back. I'm sure people can relate to that. But it's meant to be sent home, gives parents an idea of what we're talking about and some ideas of how they can help promote it at school. And then a think sheet. And you could use these, again, I'll talk about where they might fit in the lesson. I think this is a good formative assessment. I think it would qualify as at the end of the lesson to reflect overall kind of broadly on the why, the when, the how of the skill to kind of access what students got out of it. And they also, I'll get into it later, are good for behavior processing. So I'm trying not to forget about that later, but I want to get into the lesson slides. So every lesson is going to open with a screen that looks like this. It's got the skill label, it's got a description of the skill, it's got a learning badge in the bottom right corner. This is an elementary one, so instead of self-management, which is the SEL standard that we're talking about here, you can see the benchmark down here, self-management, SM. We have managing yourself. So it's just a way to translate that for elementary kiddos. For secondary, for middle and high school students, it'll say self-management, self-awareness, those actual standards phrases. But those learning badges are handy. They're kind of a continuity piece, so students see them across all the curriculum materials and can see us referencing the same topic over and over again. In the bottom here, we'll have some links. So share feedback takes you to a form where you can share feedback with us, and it's extremely important. These materials, I can't emphasize enough how much they have changed since we launched the curriculum based on teacher feedback. We've overhauled almost every single slide and every single presentation. It's been a huge amount of work to respond to teacher feedback. So keep it coming. And a link to our website where you can access more materials. And then here, what's new, this is a sign up for our mailing list. So, can't emphasize enough, especially if you're an interventionist, you want to hear about when we've made updates to the curriculum. You're using it all the time. You want to hear about it. So sign up for the mailing list. I manage it. I won't spam you. It's just when we have enough updates to go out, like every 2 weeks or about once a month, we'll send out an update email. Second slide. So this will either be a video or a quote from a famous person or a quote, something a student is saying, just something something that students can engage with really fast to get them talking. And sometimes it's more than one. For a lot of lessons, we'll have a video and then a quote. Again, this is more robust than the core edition. There's going to be more here, more slides, more of everything. So it's getting students talking, attention getter. Then we get into some reflection at the outset, like what is your level of proficiency? So depending on the comfort level with the students, what you think they'll go for, you could have them actually raise their hands and do a fist to 5 here, or 1 to 5 rather, or you could have them just quietly self-reflect, but they're just pausing at the beginning here to assess their proficiency, and then at the end they'll do the same thing at the end of the lesson. So then these are all broken up into sections, which is nice. You can kind of see now we're getting into prior knowledge. What do you already know? And where in the core edition, tier 1 lessons, we just ask this with one slide, one question. For the intervention editions, more of everything, you'll have 2 or 3 slides typically that ask this really in just same question in different ways, because we just want, again, more space, more time to unpack for these students who need that supplemental or intensive instruction. So in this case, it's asking, have you seen someone do this in movies or in TV, in real life? Have you seen somebody doing this? Or pretend you need to teach this to somebody. So they're going to say similar things in response to these questions, but it's just giving them different ways to think about it. And then we get into why is this important? And in the core edition, we would just jump into some reasons. So we would jump basically right here. In the intervention edition, we have more space and more time, so we have the capacity to pause and elicit more from the students. So I want to pull this out of the students as much as possible now that I have the time. So to do that, we use kind of a T-chart. And if you're on a smart board where you're able to write on the board, I mean, it says it in the speaker notes down there, but if you're able to write on this picture, do that. Or, I didn't always have that capability, so sometimes I'd have to just like dry erase on the whiteboard, but whatever you can do. Kind of asking like, what will happen if you do this and do it well? What will happen if you don't use this skill, don't ignore distractions, or if you struggle to ignore distractions? So, students, I love these discussions. Students come up with really great ideas. And then hopefully when you get to this slide, which is the pre-written student-facing they're meant to appeal to students, reasons, there's those questions at the top, like, did we think of all of these? Did we think of any others? And it's, usually for me, like a pat yourself on the back moment, because usually this discussion here, we came up with pretty much everything that's on this slide or more. And it's just acknowledgement, like, hey, we got it. And it's just repetition. Then there's a values reflection. So we had a lot of feedback from teachers asking, can we build in just consistent opportunities for students to be reflecting on their values and naming their values and verbalizing their values? So we're just asking here, what connections do you see between the skill, the topic we're talking about, and any of these values? So it helps students with that values vocabulary. And anything, I'll just stop here, anything you can do to add your own touch, as much as you're comfortable doing that, really matters. We hear that from teachers and from students, that they love it when their teachers open up and share like, hey, this is one of my values. This is such a good slide for that. Like, challenge is a really important value for me. I really value when I'm challenged and I have to grow and I struggle. I could verbalize that and say, sometimes I'm in situations where I have a hard time ignoring distractions and I have a hard time focusing. And you could name a specific example. And then you could say, I come home from work and I'm talking to my son, and I have a hard time sometimes because I'm distracted by work or things that I'm stressed about. And I have a hard time focusing on what someone is saying to me, and I have to work extra hard. And that's an important value to me. So you get what I'm saying. As much as you can open up, that builds relationships with your students, builds trust. So as much as you're comfortable doing that. How does it look? So you're going to see this overarching slide that gives you all the skill steps, in this case for ignoring distractions. The point here, we say like quick skim in the top left corner and then deep dive in the bottom right corner. You don't want to get hung up here because you're going to dig into each of these steps individually and have plenty of time to unpack it. So right here, I would just read this, or if students have the reading level, I'd ask for a volunteer to read the skill steps. And that's pretty much all I would do. And then we get to the skill steps. So I would, read this. This isn't scripted. We're not going to have you walking around your classroom with a script where you're reading the bolded sentences. It's not that boxing you in, but there's enough text on the slide to just read. But then ideally you have that, you're adding your own touch, you're expounding on it, and that adds your own personal touch. So as much as you're comfortable and ready to do that, recommend you just take what's on here and then add to it. Same thing for slide 2. You might see some random discussion questions or videos interspersed in these, and those are, you just pause and, ask students the discussion questions, play the videos. It's just so different from lesson to lesson what you're going to find in here. I can't cover all of it. So this is getting at, again, how does it look to do this skill, in this case to ignore distractions. Then we get to application. And it says on here, my turn. So we're going to do like an I do, we do, you do. In this case, it's an I do. I'm going to model. So I'm going to give this skill a try is what I'm saying to students. Like, pay close attention because I'm going to hand it off to you guys sooner than you know it, and you'll have to be ready. So here's a scenario, and then I have the skill steps for me right there. And my task is just to like match those two things together. You'll notice as well on the bottom left, there's that progress, those progress dots. That's really helpful as an instructor for pacing, for one. So I know I don't get lost. I know how many are left to get through. And 2 of these are for me, for my turn. And then in every lesson, you're going to see 3 of them are for students, for your turn, for their practice. So I want to set a really good example. There's a couple things here to mention. Like, some of these skills are really covert, and by that I mean you can't really see it. Like, ignoring distractions is pretty much happening in your brain. So I'm gonna, to model it, do a lot of narration, just talking through it. Whereas a skill like resolving conflict, it's really easy to just see that happening. So, different levels of narration is kind of what I'm saying you're gonna need when you're demonstrating this for the class. The other thing is that I would ask for volunteers. So, regardless of what grade level, I'd ask somebody to come to the front of the room and they would participate in this with me. I love that this one has a teacher in it, because my favorite thing was when a student would have to model being the teacher. And I say have to, but they got such a kick out of it. And just, I always saw the best teacher impressions with students doing that. They were just so firm and so good at being such a directive teacher. So I would be the person in the situation who needs to use the skill. So if I'm the person who needs to calm down and I'm in the teacher's class, I would have the student model being the teacher, and then I would be the student or the daughter or the son, whoever needs to use the skill, because again, I'm modeling it. And again, I want to do a good job, but I might not be perfect. And what we do on the next slide is have some discussion. And I'm inviting, like, what did we see? What did we not see? What was done well? What could have been done better? So I generally just throw all these questions out there and let students pick one to respond to, because, I mean, they're asking similar things in different ways. But the skill steps are right there. And we're just analyzing, like, what critically thinking about what happened. And I'm just realizing now that through this whole video, I forgot to kind of talk about where the worksheets fit into this. So like I said, it is in the lesson plan, so you can look there, but just to step back, when I'm right here and we're doing this acting out thing, you could have a stack of these. So as we're doing the scenarios, the modeling, the practice, you can have observers. So in this case, I'm acting it out. I'm the teacher acting it out. The students in the class, while I'm acting it out, could be doing this little worksheet. And you'd need a lot of paper. What I did more often is students wouldn't do it for this part when I'm modeling. They would do it in the your turn. So I'd have students in groups of 3, and 2 students would be acting something out, and the third would be writing down notes on here, just to have them involved and engaged while the other 2 are acting it out. So it's just completely optional and completely up to you how you use it, but this observation worksheet is designed to fit here. What I skipped was the rationale worksheet. This one about why. Why is it important? So you could do this further up here when we're talking about why is this important. So again, it's completely optional, but that's kind of where it would fit. So back down. So I would repeat the same sequence. So I've got a new scenario, scenario 2. I'm still modeling. It's my turn. I would ask for a student volunteer if I need one. And then I would look at these steps, which are there for me. I would do a good job modeling the skill, and then I would open it up for discussion and analysis of what I did. And then I pass it off to the students. And depending on the grade level you're working with, you're making a decision about, can they do this in groups of 2 or 3 all at the same time? Can they do this independently? Or do I need to pull a group of 2 or 3 students up to the front and coach them to do it? I'm not involved anymore, but they're the ones acting out the situation, but I'm still coaching them. So the second thing I described, where I have 2 or 3 kids at the front of the room and I'm coaching them to act out the scenario, that's going to be a good fit for really young elementary because they, generally speaking, just don't have the independence to be broken out into groups and stay on topic and on task while they're acting out the situation. Every student's different, of course. But as you get older, like I taught middle and high school students a lot in groups. So like I would have very often just, find a partner, the student sitting next to them, they would be partners. And when I said go, we looked at the scenario and I said go, they would have, doesn't take long, like 30 seconds or a minute to play out the scenario with each other. And then we would open up and say, like, what did you see? And they would be sharing with the whole group about what their partner did. And we just repeat that 3 times. And again, I'll just reiterate, this is one of those places where it's an option, but you could do groups of 3. 2 people could be acting it out, and you could have one person being the critical observer, which I think can make your discussion more rich because one person wasn't involved. They were really paying attention to the voice tone or the volume or the word choices of the people involved. And then we have, does it always look the same? So it's an opportunity at the end of the lesson to reflect on, is this recipe, these skill steps, which are on the right side of the slide, are they going to play out the same in every situation? Can students stress test this essentially and think of, in this scenario, you'd have to do it a little bit differently, so it's inviting that critical thinking from students. And then we end on, again, reflecting on their skill growth, hopefully. So hopefully their rating of themselves at the beginning of the lesson might be a little bit higher at the end of the lesson because we've worked on it. And then finally, we have a little reflection of, learning badge, and then these values icons, so I can pause and remind students of what we learned about. And that is going to bring me back. That's the end of a typical lesson. And I'm scrolling up. Before I forget, I'm clicking on Make It Happen, which is where we have training resources, implementation resources. And it's a little bit meta because the video I'm shooting right now is going to go right here, replace this. But there's some, always growing amount of resources on these pages. What I wanted to point out is the student learning log. This is elementary focused, not for secondary, but I really thought of intervention groups when I was making this because I think a student writes their name, they can draw a picture of themselves, but as they're going through topics with you, they can color in these little coins, if they learned about managing yourself or knowing yourself, color in these little coins, and then the values are on here too. And it's just a cool way to track what they've covered and what they're learning is visually, colorfully throughout the year or their time in your intervention group. And this is not designed, by the way, to replace a school-wide incentive system. So if you have a ticket or school-wide incentive system, this isn't designed to replace that. This is just meant to be a ritual at the end of your groups, of your instruction. And what you might do is say like, hey, for every 10 coins that we earn or color in on our sheet, we'll do a Go Noodle dance party, that kind of thing. Just so that there's a little bit more juice and something of consequence that's positive coming from this ritual that you're doing, so it has a little more meaning. And I'm going back to my page. Like I said, I talked about a typical lesson. I'm going to jump into these extension activities pieces. So like I said, these are kind of a general grab bag of worksheets, videos with discussion questions, read alouds, like this is one I'd have to buy. Some of them are ones that are YouTube videos where someone's reading the book. Let me just look at a upper grades one to show you a different example. Like this is more what an upper grades one would look like. So there's like computer-based stuff. Let me look at a K1 just to show you that. K3. I just wanted to find one with more. There, some like YouTube read alouds. So it's just a more, some enrichment materials to add on to your structured, rigorous lessons. And jumping back, let me get back to Intervention Edition. I wanted to talk about community building. So if you click here, there are icebreakers, would you rather questions, games, pretty paltry amount of games, but we're learning and growing all the time for you to build community. in your instructional groups. And then the last thing I wanted to talk about is these flexible extension activities. So I mentioned, I won't get into the specific details and bore you, but I didn't get to use a lot of Be Good People lessons during my SEL skill groups. So these guys here are some very fun, like this is a basically apples to apples, like a matching game that I would play with 4th through 12th graders, where there's like skill cards and situation cards and you match them. So fun, had so much fun with it, and it required no prep. So if I was in a desperate situation running from a crisis right to teaching class, this was my go-to. So I won't bore you with these because if you click learn more, we literally did a podcast episode where we walked through every one of these and talked about where it was created, why we thought of it, how to do it, some tips and tricks. So don't sleep on that. Those are really fun. And then there's some resources for, and I'm not going to forget, I almost did, but I'm not going to forget about these think sheets. These are some resources for taking the curriculum concepts like mood meter visuals, Yale's mood meter, calming strategies, the mini posters. Like if I click this, it'll give me all the mini posters, which is very handy if you want to print all of them, so you don't have to do it one by one. Some things to take the curriculum and add it throughout your school day, basically. Take it further. And the last thing I'll talk about is these think sheets. So you saw them in, there's this one think sheet for ignoring distractions in that curriculum folder. But I can print all of them at once, and why would you want to do that? Well, if you have a behavior processing room, and students need to come in, cool down. If they were referred out of class, they need to come in and cool down. Once they are in a place where they're ready to talk about what happened, we want to do two main things, like figure out how we're going to fix, repair, restore what happened. That might be an apology, but we also want to learn from the experience, have a teachable moment. So we talk about what could we have done instead. And these think sheets are really great for being a tool in your toolbox for that situation where you're talking about what a skill looks like in application. So they are fantastic for that, and just highly recommend you leverage them in that space, because people in that situation often need materials like this to make that a productive learning experience for the student. And that's it. That is a 101 on the Be Good People curriculum for interventionists. I hope you enjoy it. I hope it benefits your students, and thank you for watching this video. Have a wonderful day.